I've written an article on my webpage, which I've just shown you how to get there, if you're interested in seeing some things I wrote about what happened in the 1990s in terms of this alliance, and I talked about Landcare being, in the 90s, being like a willful teenager who wanted to leave home, and its parents trying to control it. So the parents were the government, and some officials in the government, particularly in the mid-90s, late 90s, I think were threatened by the successes of Landcare. I remember a proposal which a lot of students are going to look at where there was a proposal to link all the Landcare groups in Australia in the early days of the internet. And I suspect there were some people in the government quite threatened by the idea of hundreds of thousands of people around Australia comparing notes on how to deal with the federal government. So a very anarchic but very powerful organisation, you think of all those people around Australia talking to each other. So the politics of getting Landcare up were quite interesting. Again, a really interesting case study of the policy process in Australia. So it was all about timing, led them up to the 1990 election. It also involved waiting for a less sympathetic senior minister who went overseas and getting the ear of a junior minister and getting him to take the submission straight to cabinet. So, as I said, environmental policy planning can be all about timing. Remember that flimsy raft adrift at sea. And of particular importance was the fact that the proposal was attractive to the consensus-orientated Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, and that we had a Federal Minister for Primary Industry, I think I've already mentioned in this course, John Kerrin, who was interested in land degradation. So not many ministers of primary industry, geographers, and have publications in journals about land degradation, but there's one you can read if you're interested. So we might just have our mid-break now, and I'll resume after the break and talk about where Landcare went. Just before I get the facilitators, just for you sitting to say something briefly about what you learned about facilitation and the topic. Caitlin was asking about the graduate recruitment process. So the department that's employed the most single number of people from this course is this department, Department of Environment, Water, Heritage and Art, or its previous incarnations of the Department of Environment, something different. And there's a graduate entry scheme there that closes Friday, is that right? Friday week. That's today week, yeah. So that's the easiest way to get a job in that area. A lot of people from this course have gone through and done that. I'm happy to be a referee if anyone wants to do it. All the different government departments have a similar entry scheme, but some of you feel this is your last year if you're used to working in policy areas in the federal government. That's the best way to do it. So can I have the public participation facilitator from Thursday 5 to 7. It's Shirley.
Sorry, Tuesday or Thursday?
Thursday. I've gone to Thursday. So, less than 1 minute. What you learned about facilitating, what you learned about talking. Okay. Just one person. Yeah, you don't need to both.
Okay. In that case, can I sit down? So, what I learned, main thing I learned was how hard it was to facilitate the tutorial because we were trying to do 5 things at once. But from the group, we got a lot of new ideas about scale and all the things that we didn't consider in the tutorial about people and timing, and also a lot more of the finance. And then summary of what we did.
Did you learn about facilitating or
We learned a lot about facilitating itself and how hard it was, and also about the topic as in scale and the financial side of it. And then, is there anything else? Okay.
So Thursday at 12. The nature of Landcare and the politics and circumstances of getting up. So remember what we're doing this for is to think about why some policies work and some don't. And I mentioned before the break that Landcare was interesting in that it was picking up on something that existed already in terms of community action. And it also picked up on a national soil conservation program again, which already existed, but only had funding of 4 million. So it was a 100-fold increase in funding to what Landcare represented in a sense. And as you can see, the figure there was about the same annually as been spent on the landscape in New Harbour House at the time. So not a huge new policy. But the important thing was that it was these existing groups and a small policy structure to get hold of it. The number of groups in Australia skyrocketed. So I started teaching this course in the early, mid-1990s during that kind of peak take-off period. And it was really interesting going to areas around Banana in northwest Victoria, talking to some of the first Landcare coordinators. And what had changed just in 10 years was that 10 years ago there had been 2 Landcare groups in Australia, and you could get on the phone to the minister at any time of day or night and say, you know, we've got a problem here, can you give me a bit of extra funding, or we've got this new idea, what do you think of it? So that was there was half a dozen Landcare groups in Australia, but by the time it was 2,000 or 3,000 Landcare groups, the whole dynamic had changed very dramatically, and people started talking about Landcare being a victim of its own success in terms of there being so many different groups. It's interesting to reflect on what motivated Landcare groups to form. As I said before, a major problem is often what motivated people, and people often talked about how bad government policies in the past were responsible. So it can be a bit of a cop-out to say, I'm not going to do anything because the government has created this problem. So again, that's something to deal with. Particularly, it seems to be a characteristic of Australians to sort of blame the government and maybe not being proactive at all times in times of looking for solutions. And that sort of, they ought to do something. And then attitude was, when you think about it, they often is us. And the group, when they come together, have the capacity to deal with things. Andrew Campbell wrote a book mentioning that it's no coincidence a lot of early Landcare groups started in places where there was a rising dryland salinity. So when you have a rising tide of salty ground, the saltiest the sea beneath your farm, it's obvious that A, you need to act, and 2, you can't solve the problem unless other people act with you. So this is a very good example, dryland salinity, of the need to act collectively. So in many cases, the problems related to tree clearance on raised areas, many kilometres away from where the dryland salinity is occurring. So this is a classic dryland salinity site in a place called Warrnambool, Boho, where that original Landcare group was. And this course used to have a 6-day field trip as part of it, and we used to go down there. The tree clearance on those hills has reduced the vegetation cover. The trees used to suck the groundwater back up into the atmosphere. Now there's greater recharge into the water table, and the salty water, as you can see, is just coming to the surface. And many of you have done field trips to Dix Creek, which is much closer, just near Yass. So Yass is another area of classic dryland salinity problems. So dryland salinity has been a major factor in motivating people to do things. So what does a Landcare group actually do? They tend to have a committee which organises activities to raise awareness of issues related to land and water resources. Issues can be very diverse and vary from region to region. So Landcare groups have been responding to weeds, feral animals, water quality, soil erosion, soil structure decline, salinity, as I mentioned, rising groundwater. And the really interesting thing is that Landcare groups have had the diversity and flexibility to respond in different ways to quite different local environmental and cultural conditions. So this flexibility and local nature of Landcare has been one of its great strengths. So the diversity of approaches is important given the past tendency in Australian policy to have blanket solutions. So here's a quote from Sher and Sher. It recognises, so that in policymakers in the past have tended to ignore the tremendous diversity of the nation's rural peoples, communities and economies. So as a result, often we've had inappropriate policies and programs. Blanket solutions are often going to fail. I'm struck by doing some work with Landcare groups just between Junee and Wagga back in the 90s, and I don't know if it's still the case, but then there was quite a dramatic change as you went on that road between as you headed west, you got into more livestock and moved away from the grain area. And the grain farmers tended to be much different attitudes than the cow cockies. So the grain farmers tend to be much more inclusive in terms of women and children being involved in farming practices, whereas the cow cockies tend to be a more male attitude, male involvement, and then those different Landcare groups were quite different just as a result of that. So just in the space of 100 kilometres quite a difference. And in turn, those differences